The House will now have under consideration House Bill number 140. Good lady from District 7.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that for the reading of House Bill 40 be dispensed with and that the journal show that it's been read in full section by section and properly placed before the House for final consideration.
Without objection, the lady has the floor to open the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 140. It's a very important piece of legislation. It encompasses the very essence of everything we've been taught growing up in America, the land of the brave and the free. It's about personal freedom. This legislation is very important to Idahoans. I know you've received lots of emails. I've even received some from people who live out of the state, professors and doctors. So I think it's proper to thoroughly review this bill. First of all, the mechanics of the language. Second, why there's a growing need for this law. And third, to preemptively address the counter-argument as we segue into debate. So first of all, the mechanics. The simple language just adds a new chapter to Title 44 regarding our labor laws. A quick look inside that chapter, you'll see that even polygraph tests are prohibited as a condition of employment. Union contracts are a condition that's prohibited as a condition of employment. But this specific new chapter, it only prohibits state contracted employees from discriminating. This doesn't apply to all employers. So it doesn't necessarily dive into the Education Committee or topic. I haven't received any concerns from education. It doesn't dive into dealing with the military division. I know maybe someone had mentioned, does it affect the Guard? This is only for companies that contract with the state or a political subdivision. And so we would have to dive into those individual contracts. Second, I would like to address the need. Why do we need this legislation? So I'll just share a story from actually one of my neighbors in District 7. We'll call her Lori. Lori worked as an X-ray tech for an employer in our district for 14 years. She received exemplary annual reviews. She believes in vaccines, and she received a whole host of them, even those for measles and mumps and rubella. Yet the influenza vaccine, she knew, had many side effects and little proven effectiveness. And after taking it and having a severe allergic reaction, she started to find out. She ended up having to take epinephrine shots to reopen her airway to allow her to even regain consciousness after a vaccine. And so at that point, she just always requested and signed a declination form, which was, it was an option at that time. And during the flu season, she would don personal protective gear and she would do different things. So in 2017, things started to change. That company moved to 100% compliance. So she went to her doctor and her allergist, and they provided her a letter, 2 separate letters, one from her doctor and one from her allergist, to help her exempt her from this 100% compliance requirement. Interestingly, she was denied. And the vaccine 100% compliance mandate was imposed even upon delivery workers who came to the facility or associated with anyone in the building, FedEx drivers, the linen delivery service, the food service driver. They were all required and are required to provide proof of a current vaccination record. But her exemption was denied. Her only option was to be terminated. And sadly, the doctor who provided her exemption letter was also terminated. When you look at the denial letter from Lori, I find it interesting because she actually does have one of the CDC, they call it a contraindication of the CDC guidance says, a severe allergic reaction could be one. But when she was denied in the letter, they said there was no contraindication that was documented. And because she didn't have actual proof or evidence of that, that's why they could not give her a medical exception. Lori is not alone. There are dozens of stories, I'm sure, in a lot of the emails that you received. And there's an increasing number of employees who do not want to comply with the 100% mandate. And a time when we need all hands on deck in our labor field and in our labor force, we can't afford to have people discriminated against because of their vaccination status. We want people to work. We need people to work. So, first, let's talk about some of the exemptions, because that's one of the things they say, well, it's not 100% compliance. There is an exemption. There's a medical exemption and a religious exemption. So the story of Lori, we just talked about that medical exemption. But it's not guaranteed. You have a board deciding. We had some really powerful testimony in committee. And some of the Idahoans talked about how they have certain genetic disposition. One and such, like their alleles can't detoxify as quickly as others. And then you have the issue of your titers. So when you take a vaccine, not everybody develops immunity to the same amount. And a lot of times, maybe your titers reveal that you don't have full immunity. And another thing that happens is even if you did take one vaccine over a period of time, the titers decline and you potentially need a follow-up vaccine. But that's not being followed or tracked. Then you have individuals who also testified, who shared how they have a specific autoimmune disorder in which many vaccines are not control tested or researched with people who have autoimmune disorders. Let's talk about the religious exemption. When you dive into what is allowed in the religious exemption, it specifically says it's only allowed, or the exemption is only allowed for organized religions that have the exemption as one of their basic tenets. A quick Wikipedia study will show you that none of the major world religions have a specific tenet in it regarding your vaccination status. Yet we have lots and lots of testimony from people who have a strong religious belief that keeps them from accepting a vaccine. And yet those religious exemptions are not being honored all the time. So I would suggest that when we say, hey, there are exemptions, that in both of these cases, these proposed exemptions are just merely empty gestures. And they're not really helping our employees, the people who want to work. Let's look at on why 100% vaccine compliance policy is not safe or an effective one-size-fits-all approach for a quality workforce. It was 1986, after I was born, where Congress passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which removed liability from vaccine manufacturers for injury or death directly resulted by the use of the vaccine products. So that removed all liability. And then let's look at the number of vaccines that has increased drastically during my lifetime. Back when I was born, there were about 24 doses that were required. Now we're up to 70. And if you're pregnant, it's a handful more. that the U.S. requires more vaccines than 34 other countries in the world that have lower infant mortality rates than we do. So this National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, it established a very unique federal government court process designated as the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, whereby the families of victims of vaccines are asked to submit petitions to a vaccine court, and a special master is assigned to the court to determine whether or not a victim of a vaccine injury will receive any compensation, and that compensation is taxpayer money. This court has paid out nearly $5 billion to families of American citizens and children who've been injured or killed by vaccines. And this amount is just a very small portion of what could have been paid out. In 1990, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services established a vaccine adverse events reporting system. And in order to monitor potentially safety problems with these vaccines, patients and medical providers are invited to report potential adverse effects, but there's definitely no requirement. And in 2018 alone, there were more than 40,000 cases of adverse events associated with the administration of vaccines. And those are just the ones that were reported. You know, the United States Supreme Court has stated that vaccines are unavoidably safe because they're classified as biologics rather than drugs. This kind of bit of a loophole allows them to contain chemical and biological materials which have not been thoroughly safety tested prior to use in these vaccine solutions. Vaccine ingredients can include aluminum adjuvants, mercury, blood, and unintended viruses from animal tissues, and DNA from human aborted fetal cells. This many adverse reactions, this much taxpayer money being paid out, the lack of caution regarding individuals' genetic predisposition to adverse reactions, the lack of follow-up on what your level of titers are to testing to ensure that we're actually getting immunity from these vaccines, the use of fetal and animal tissue material, and the systematic removal and the denial of exemptions. These are just a few of the many reasons why 100% vaccine compliance is not good public policy, and it's a violation of our very basic personal freedoms. Lastly, I'd like to address some of the counter arguments as we segue into debate. You know, the medical industry was one of the biggest opponents. They don't want restrictions on their safety standards, and they want all means available to ensure a safe atmosphere. We all want safety. But I'd argue that these tactics only offer a false sense of security while annihilating our personal liberty. As you weigh the balance of safety versus liberty with this piece of legislation, keep this in mind. Currently, in the medical field, employees are working in every corner of the industry, and they have HIV, and they have hepatitis, and they have tuberculosis, and they're working with our sick and our elderly, and the American Disabilities Act protects them from having to identify their condition. So why is it that they can be protected, that they are allowed to work, that they can work in this profession, but yet a healthy individual who has this preference cannot? They're being fired. You know, I also want to address one of the issues. There was a handout presented on this bill, and I'd like to address, I think, what might be the biggest challenge or opposition to this, where it talks about, hey, if we're going to stop contracting with individuals who force this mandate, first of all, I would suggest just take away the 100% compliance requirement. It's really quite simple. They did it in 2017. There was no change in Medicaid. There was no change in providers or who got care or didn't get care. We just need to undo that mandate. And then as far as dealing with contracts, as we move forward, I want to, I think this third subsection here, there's worry that there would be a constitutional challenge by inserting new terms into existing contractual language. I'd like just to draw your attention to the bill language itself. On the first page, line 35, where it's really, I think it's just a sentence, where it talks about the state of Idaho and any political subdivision in the state may not enter into a contract. I'd like to draw your attention to those lines, may not enter into. So this is talking about moving forward, not entering into a contract. This is not trying to jeopardize, and I think there is an easy solution. And I hope that you will stand with Idahoans for personal freedom on this issue. With that, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 16.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the good lady from 7 yield to a question?
Will the lady yield?
The lady yields.
Lady yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And good lady from 7, as I have worked on non-discrimination legislation in the past, my legislation has been turned down due to creating special rights or a special class or a special status based on a lifestyle choice. So can you explain to me how House Bill 140 is not indeed creating special rights or a special status based on this lifestyle choice?
Lady from 7.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good gentlemen. I would just argue that your personal autonomy and not having something forced into your body is a personal right, is a freedom. And I would very much agree with you that I would love to see all legislation in this body be given a fair chance on this floor.
Gentleman from 16.
To debate the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good ladies and gentlemen, I wholeheartedly agree with the statement on personal autonomy. We should be able to be who we want to be. I appreciate the story that was shared about someone who was discriminated against based on a choice that was made. Now, some of the legislation that I've worked on, I would argue perhaps is not so much a choice, but nonetheless, I believe that we should be protecting all Idahoans, particularly in matters of employment, and we should absolutely be enshrining it in Idaho Code. Now, I'm sure you will hear more debate specific to this bill, and you'll hear why this is not a good bill, but I will be giving this my red light.
Is there further debate? Hearing none. Lady for 35.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to say I'm very concerned with the direction we're heading as a state. What has happened to the idea of strengthening our immune systems and strengthening and being responsible for our own health? What will happen to our health privacy? I don't think any of us wants that in the public view, and we will be required to tell people about what we're doing. Are we really going to get to the point where we are differentiated by whether we get a shot of some kind? So I'm a patient of a doctor who helps people with vaccine damages, and so I've seen some of the results. Many of us can go through and get some kind of a vaccine, a genetic modulation, whatever you want to call it, and we're fine. but there are many that do not. And I could tell you of instances I've seen where people were pressured and persuaded into receiving these vaccines and the results of that. And it's heartbreaking. And I don't think we should force anybody to that. We need to take responsibility for our health, and we need to accept, I think the good lady from 7 made a very compelling case. And there are many of us who will not take vaccines. We attempt to keep our bodies healthy and believe that that is not something that we need to do. And I'm not willing to take those things into my body. So I am very supportive of this, and I appreciate the good lady bringing this forth. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Lady from 8. 8.
Thank you, Speaker. To speak in support of the bill. As many of you know, not a lot of the new legislators know that I have a son who is autistic as a result of vaccine injury. And we've worked really hard. He's turned out to be a great young man. But I will tell you right now, based on the physiology of every one of us in the room, some of us can deal with vaccines and others can't. And for us to put people at risk, there's no way another moon will ever take a vaccine until the end of any of our lives. And just based on the fact I have seen many kids who are autistic and the parents are almost forced at the county level, you've got to get your other kid vaccinated. And the odds of both of them coming out with autism are 1 in a billion. And how many times has the second child become autistic from an 18-month immunization? So when going around the state, and I've told you I've been around the state talking to a lot of folks, do you know that at almost every single one of the gatherings, adults ask me, where are you on the vaccines? And I said, that's the hill I will die on. It is so important that we have a right to say no, especially if you know there's history in your family of a possible injury, because it's something I would not wish on any of you. Honestly, you don't want that. So this is a good bill. We need to definitely give people an option. And when you have adults asking you, please, please don't force me to get the vaccine, I can't do it because they've already probably had vaccine injury in their family. Otherwise, there wouldn't be that type of concern. So I sure appreciate your support for this bill. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 27.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To debate the bill. My name is on the handout. I think the handout speaks for itself. I won't address that. I just want to address one thing. And I agree with the fact that if we pass this bill, what we're doing is the legislature is creating a protected class in employment law. There's any doubt about that. And is that what we want to be doing as a legislature? I think not. I will be voting no. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further debate? Lady from 19.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was in the committee and I heard a lot of the testimony, and I agree that people shouldn't be forced to receive a vaccine that they don't want to receive. I also, as the good gentleman said, worry about creating a new protected class for every kind of occupation out there. This bill may be fine for more than 99% of the jobs out there, but there are a certain small number of jobs where a person's vaccination status can be life or death for the people they're helping. You imagine a cancer treatment center where everyone who comes for care is immunocompromised. That's a place where we want to make sure people are vaccinated during a bad flu outbreak. Flu is life or death for people who are immunocompromised. And if you don't want to be vaccinated and you're employed in that place, the employer without this law could assign you to a desk job. This statute is so restrictive that it can't reassign someone to a job with significant, to it can't significantly alter your job responsibilities. And I have a big problem with that because it gets down to the safety of our most medically fragile people, whether you talk about long-term facilities, long-term care facilities, cancer treatment, for the disability community who often receive care in their home for children who are medically fragile with severe disabilities. They have people coming into their home to provide the therapies that they need, and they won't be able to ask an agency, are the folks coming into my home vaccinated, or could they bring flu or some other transmissible virus into my home? And so, I think we have protections in our statute already to prevent people from being forced to get vaccinations, but I don't think they're entitled to every single job that's out there. And I urge your red light on this.
Is there further debate? A lady from 11.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to speak in favor of this bill. I don't believe this is creating a special class in any way, shape, or form. That is the standard already. We have liberties and we have freedoms to be able to make determinations on what is put into our bodies. So I don't see how this is creating a protected class when it is already the standard. There are many provisions that are already put into place with employment and with employers on things that need to be done or things that are needing to be taken into place, and where people are fully informed of what the safety precautions or the safety issues may be with their places of employment. So employers and employees already have that ability to be able to make those determinations without having to be forced into putting something into your body. We only have to look back into history to see what has transpired in the past, and in regards with our government making decisions on what is being put into our bodies. There's been many instances within history where experimentations were done, where things people were not informed or were told lies on what was happening with different shots and injections that they were given. It doesn't take much. There's a huge portion of the population within the African American communities that are very, very concerned about vaccinations because of past histories and things that have transpired. So they already have a huge concern. Right before the session started, I sent out a survey to my constituents, asking them what was their concern, what things. I gave them a top 10 of issues that I had been hearing about to see what their top ones were. And number 2 was their vaccination freedom and their health, to be able to make those determinations. That is what they're concerned about. We are in a very different time period now than we were just a few years ago, and there are things that are out now that people have a lot of concerns about. There's trust issues, and people don't want to be forced to put something into their bodies that they don't know how it's going to affect them. We need to be able to maintain those liberties and freedoms that we have to be able to oversee how our bodies are handled and how they're taken care of. Doctors and patients should be making those decisions together at all times. And so I don't feel that by supporting this bill, it's going to create an issue. It's just codifying what we already have in place with our liberties and freedoms. And so I'll be supporting this bill. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 34.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In favor of the bill, I would like to point out that government was not instituted to control people, to control individuals and control our lives. Government was created to protect rights. And, in our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, we have inalienable rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And I would say the ability to go to work and provide for your family is the pursuit of happiness that is protected by our constitutional form of government. Whenever we see that there are mandates in the law, you got to look out for your individual rights. This bill protects the individual rights to work, and it's not in every area. It's in these state contracts, like the good lady from 7 has mentioned. And so, if government anywhere is to protect rights, we ought to at least do it in this arena, where we are not creating a class. We're creating a situation where individuals' rights are protected from mandates that would lead them to have to do something that either could be dangerous to them or that they don't like for whatever reason. But I'm in support of this bill. It's a constitutional bill and it's a freedom bill. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 17.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me focus on the more pragmatic aspect of this bill, and that is the way it will affect, the effect it will have on the way business is done. Now, I looked up the 50 states. It's called Becker's Medical Review, Hospital Review, and they have a summary of the laws of the 50 states, and it turns out that 5 states only have a medical exemption for vaccination. California, Maine, Mississippi, New York, West Virginia. 29 have only religious exemptions, and 16 have religious and personal exemptions like Idaho has. When you look at the definition of company that's in this bill, it is very broad. It includes parent companies, affiliates. Many of those companies have to comply with laws in other states. So what's going to happen is that when companies bid in Idaho, under 679210, which is our bidding statute, where we're supposed to take the best possible bid, this bill may create problems for those companies who not only wish to bid, but have a product that we really want to get. And it's not really the company's fault, because in another state where they're doing business, they may have a different rule, a different law, as I just outlined. So if they have a different law in another state and they have to comply in another state, and then our state says, well, if you comply in another state, say in Maine or California, Mississippi, New York, or West Virginia, and you're complying with their law and you only give medical exemption, but you don't give a religious exemption like Idaho does, then you can't do business. Does this mean that they can't do business in Idaho because they're not going to be able to comply with with this statute, which has 3 different categories? It has medical contradiction, reasons of conscience, or religious or philosophical belief as the definition for the definition for discrimination against unvaccinated persons. So it seems like if you want it, the bill should be perhaps limited to Idaho companies or limited to those states which have the same laws that Idaho has, because otherwise we're going to not be able to receive bids from many companies, national companies in particular, which would be to our advantage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further debate? Lady from 15.
May I ask a question to the lady from 7?
Will a good lady yield?
The lady yields.
Lady yields.
Did you mention that any of the companies we're currently doing business, this law would not apply to, so that this is only businesses that are going forward? Like
Lady
contracts
7.
were...
Lady
Thank you,
from 7.
Mr. Speaker and good lady. So in the language, it does say that the state of Idaho and any political subdivision in the state may not enter into a contract with an employer or company that engages in discrimination against unvaccinated persons.
Thank you.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're debating this bill against the backdrop of a virus with a low single-digit mortality rate that's actually already killed 500,000 Americans. And but when we pass bills, we have to think beyond just what's happening around us today and think about what the impact of a bill would have in a future scenario. And so I would just ask anyone considering voting for this bill to ask yourself if you would want this bill to be law if COVID was to mutate into a version that had a 50 to 90% mortality rate, like the Ebola virus does, and then ask yourself, would this bill be striking the right balance between the rights of the individual and what's best for the community and our society?
Count from 21.
Mr. Speaker, I am standing to speak in favor of this. I'm not sure that viral type precludes a person's right to autonomy over their own body. The choice will still be the individual's choice, and they're going to have to weigh their healthcare decisions at the time, whether it's an Ebola virus or chicken pox or anything else. I would suggest that healthcare is an extremely complex situation, and it involves many, many factors. And it can't be reduced simply to a choice between a vaccine mandate or not a mandate, or vaccine choice, or anything like that. It is so multifactorial. For instance, it was brought up about the risk in cancer centers in immunocompromised kids. I saw a program extolling the gathering of foodstuffs to be put in a food bank in the cancer center, and when the camera panned across what was in there, it was non-nutritional food that shouldn't be given to anybody at all, much less immunocompromised children undergoing chemotherapy. So there are all kinds of decisions that are individually made that have an effect on health and well-being. I don't think that we should be mandating or allowing the mandate. Those are individual decisions on a multitude of different cofactors that involve health. And I am voting for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further debate? Hearing none? Will the good lady from District 7 please stand and close the debate?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the excellent discussion and the opportunity to shed some light on a very controversial subject. And I wish that there was a specific answer and that the science was all in agreement on this subject. And really, I wish this bill language could be stronger. I wish it could include all employers. But really, this is pretty targeted, just trying to take taxpayer money out of the equation so that that taxpayer money is not being used to endorse 100% compliance. Let our people work and let our people pursue happiness. Where there are risks, I really believe there needs to be choice. And so I just ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Debate is closed. The question before the House is, shall House Bill number 140 pass the House? The clerk will unlock the machine and the members will record their votes. And, yep. Whoops. Wrong button, sorry. Does any member wish to change his vote? The clerk will lock the machine and record the vote. And read the pairs before you record the vote.
Ehart votes aye. Mathias votes nay.
The vote count shows 49 in favor with 21 against. House Bill 140 is passed the House and will be transmitted to the Senate.